All right.
All right, Luber.
I wish you read the lines for the recording. But anyway, that's why every philosophy, in a certain sense, is just part of the unfolding, the perennial philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. There is no right or wrong. You have to see how they sublate into each other.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's what I feel like Nietzsche is like circling with that enduring question, because there's something enduring about how you're able to explicate on someone else's philosophy, and in turn, it makes it your own philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's some feature that's enduring, and in that sense, you don't really see like there's no like nihilistic point of view, because everything is basically all for the sake of being the story.
Yeah.
It's just like bad things don't. This is crude. It's like bad things don't happen to me. It's actually all part of the unfolding of my life, and in that sense, it's actually a beautiful thing and not stressful, heavy, burdensome thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think this is the crux of the tension. Not between you and I, but just like between maybe like our culture currently,
Hmm.
um, where it's like we don't have any way to relate to. I was talking to even my partner about this. I was like, we don't have any way to relate to like failure or like bad what or suffering without the temptation to overcome it,
Hmm.
right? And then there's the other end of it, which is the more nihilistic one, which is to kind of just, I guess, resort to a kind of just meaninglessness of it. But you could say like both Heidegger and Nietzsche, at least, they're more like I don't even know how to explain it. It's just like it's a different way to relate to suffering and failure than either the nihilistic option or the one where failure is just a temporary provision, right?
Hmm.
And I think like my interpretation like Nietzsche's affirmation is just like taking the lack as the excess. Like taking the lack as the excess of life itself.
Hmm.
That which I cannot fully determine because it's lacking. And so in that
Hmm.
sense, the lack almost functions like a kind of overflowing um, abundance. But because we are in our stories, we ironically kind of suck the life out of that abundance and we encounter lack.
Hmm.
So it's interesting in the sense of just like, and I think Ebert's language would be more accurate in explaining like this idea of like saturation and so on. Like
Hmm.
interior exterior. It's when, you know, when you realize the lack is actually an oversaturation of the excess.
Hmm.
Like, and that's when you encounter like you could say lack, because I feel like if we're coming from always our perspectives and our personal philosophies, then that lack has to just generally be a kind of indeterminate excess. But because it's always particular, it has to manifest as a lack.
Hmm.
You know, and then in that sense, it's to your point in saying like we can't just fixate on lack because it's not it's not really getting at the movement of what is happening,
Yeah.
right? Like it's not, you're not, if you are coming up with solutions about a particular lack, I would say that's what self-help does.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, that's literally, yeah, exactly. So that's literally what self-help does, and that's literally what all this kind of like improvement coaching, everything, uh, pragmatism is kind of functioning off of. Just like, yeah, how do
Hmm.
we overcome this particular lack?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in a certain sense, what's happening with Heidegger for me is our finite, our finitude is is going in and unfolding, where it's remembering how it's always has already has oh my god, I can't say that, always already been in an infinite state.
Yes. Mhm.
And when we have like a strong vision or sense of of infinity,
Yeah.
we immediately are faced with lack.
Yeah.
And then we get into a state of forgetting about that lack.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that's just part of the oscillation that takes place in the unfolding of our finitude.
Hmm.
And it's this is where like the drive and desire comes in,
Hmm.
because desire is situated in the forgetting of the lack. It's like desire is like a byproduct of the tension between
Hmm.
the finite recollecting that it's always already been infinite, and the departure from recollecting to
Hmm.
forgetting.
Yeah.
Because like a crude example, like a classic example is like, I have a girlfriend.
Hmm.
I'm desiring my girlfriend, obviously, or she wouldn't be my girlfriend, let's say. But then I can remember, this is like a very crude way of looking at it. There's all these other girls.
Yeah.
And what's happening is you're, in a certain sense, forgetting. You recognize this. There's a recognition of like the infinite amount of other girls that could be in that position, and then you're forgetting that infinite amount of girls. And in forgetting that infinite amount of girls, there's only that one girl left, and that's your
Hmm.
girlfriend.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think like how the finite moves with the infinite, that tension that movement draws out, is
Hmm.
where desire is situated.
Yeah, because it's like finitude would be kind of like the byproduct of the excess of the infinite.
Mm-hmm.
And by virtue of the excess of the infinite, we experience lack,
Yeah.
right? And then, but because, but it's exactly that relation between finitude and the infinite that creates desire. It's
Right.
because we, right? Because we lack, we desire.
Right.
Um, and yeah, I mean, yeah, there's an element of forgetting that I think is also interesting because Nietzsche talks about this too. Like, forgetting is also like a way to like affirm life for Nietzsche,
Right.
at least in the realm of like the pathos of like revenge and resentment, particularly, right? Like when we talk about revenge, resentment, forgetting is actually helpful, and you could actually say like forgetting is almost like a way to like embrace lack, almost to be able to forget, um, at least in the context of resentment and revenge, because resentment and revenge is like a way to like deny life in a way,
Mm-hmm.
without really knowing it. Like I think Nietzsche's take on this, like I cannot stop thinking about like how Buber and Heidegger took so much influence from Nietzsche when I'm reading Nietzsche, because I think Nietzsche's affirmation of like amor fati, loving one's fate, actually revealed and ethics of the other precisely for that move. Like, I don't think Nietzsche actually gave I mean, you could say he had his own ethics, but I think his whole idea of amor fati, um and this kind of love of fatalism, love of fate, is ironically a kind of letting go, a letting. But I think Heidegger and Buber stretch this further in the sense of like, but this is actually the very realm of opening that allows us to encounter the other in like a
Mm-hmm.
real way. And I think even Levinas would follow in that line of thought too, because he's coming from Heidegger
Mm-hmm.
as well. And I was like really thinking about that, because when we encounter human beings, Nietzsche is basically saying like we're always reacting, right? So reacting is basically like we're always trying to like fight some resistance. Um, and Nietzsche looks at it as like we need to look for resistances, but not bring up our defenses.
Mm-hmm.
And Buber says something similar about encountering the other. The only way you can encounter the other is by not by shedding like your resistances, basically, right? Like
Which
shed
would mean not to overcome.
what?
Which would mean not to overcome.
Not
Like
to overcome. Yeah.
to go back to what you were originally saying about
Mhm.
that urge where it's like where the I forget which word, it's a tragedy,
Yeah.
where a tragedy you feel like you have to overcome it, and how do you endure tragedy
Mm-hmm.
essentially
Mm-hmm.
in a way that doesn't destroy you,
Uh-huh.
because I
Yeah.
think
I mean,
that's
yeah.
yeah.
I think the I think that's like what's weird. It's like the enjoyment out of annihilation. If being is always becoming,
Yeah.
right? Like I feel like that's the part that we're missing in our times, I guess. The enjoyment of the annihilation. Because I think the only relation we have to that enjoyment of the annihilation is just nihilism. It's just not, um so and it's funny because to be able to affirm that annihilation as a part of the coming, as a part of becoming, is really to like also affirm life. But because we lack as beings, it's tragic, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like I think that would be like what is actually tragic about the human state. The human state is that it lacks.
Mm-hmm.
And in that sense, every philosophy is kind of like you could arguably say maybe a tragic philosophy, um, because it's trying to respond to that lack in whatever way it believes to respond to. Right. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think this. So going on to the storyteller line,
Mm-hmm.
I do think Nietzsche broke open that space. I really do.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly because he's the one that starts really focusing on the psychological and predispositional aspect of philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Like he really was just like, yeah, when people have their own philosophies, it's basically their own biographies, you know? So, and I think storyteller is the acceptance of that position,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I'm telling the story because of like almost like this is how I am, almost.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm telling a story, obfuscating myself, even though myself is deeply immersed in the story,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think that combination of psychology and philosophy does bridge, and I think Heidegger being like the end of metaphysics kind of point is that bridge opening for the storyteller paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think historically, I think that interpretation can be argued for, and I think it's correct. You know, like I think Nietzsche broke open that door for that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I think it's not that these ways of being or ways of expressing
Uh-huh.
being, it's not like they're over.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
They, because the reality is, they can never actually be over.
Mhm.
It's they need to change along with how the world is changing,
Huh.
and I think that's Heidegger. Heidegger, I think, is just doing something provocative by saying it's the end of metaphysics, only insofar as you reposition what metaphysics means now that it's ended.
Yeah, I mean, to say that metaphysics ends is to conclude the story and then begin a new story, basically,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
It's the way that we've talked about metaphysics that is revealed as a story.
Yes.
And Heidegger reveals this,
Mm-hmm.
right? The onto-theology paradigm of metaphysics.
Mm-hmm.
And it has always been I mean, I think if I'm correct, he does argue that like philosophy from him, like before him, it was always onto-theological for
Mm-hmm.
philosophy. So that was the story. That was the story for the longest time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but now it's changed. So we're, even to say end of metaphysics is just the beginning of something else,
Mm-hmm.
even though metaphysics is not really done with, but the story is done with. The way we
Mm-hmm.
talked previously is done with, maybe.
Our approach, right?
Yeah, right, yeah.
And that's the thing with philosophy. It's always one's approach to the meaning of being.
Yes.
Where a storyteller isn't necessary. It's not about an approach to the meaning of being, but it's actually setting up the parameters for being to like live.
Yeah.
Like to go back to like I don't know if you watched. I don't know if Daniel post that net. It was ridiculous. Last like hour and a half. It was just like me and him talking, and it was it was blowing my mind. I honestly I was like on the verge of tears. Like it was beautiful. But the conversation that Daniel and Michelle had about making the net is very different than the conversations that I have participating in it.
Hmm.
It's a whole different discourse.
Hmm.
So like kind of go to like Frege's ontological design.
Hmm.
That's a different discourse
Yeah.
than philosophy. I would just argue that ontological design is storytelling. But
Ontological.
then
Yeah.
but then Jockin makes a distinction between the engineer and the artist.
Mm, okay. What's that distinction?
Um, but both how I would understand it, I don't know if you would agree, but both the artist and the engineer are both operating under a theme,
Yeah.
but how the engineer prioritizes the theme over
Mhm.
beauty, while the artist will prioritize beauty over theme.
The artist will prioritize beauty over theme.
Yeah, so like something that I realized, I would collapse theme into beauty, where actually beauty is what provides the condition for the theme to reveal itself. And
Mm,
then once the theme reveals itself, beauty conceals itself.
mhm, mhm.
So
Okay.
beauty is like being the big other,
Okay.
and
And
theme is the small other. It's the partial object.
okay.
So theme is like it has its both its foot in beauty and in goodness.
Hmm.
In other words,
Hmm.
goodness being like the the view the view of the object, like how you take on the object,
Hmm.
where beauty is more about you being like washed over by the object. You can see something completely new within the object. Like it pushes the horizon of what that object means.
The beauty does.
Beauty does. So like theme is the boundary condition, but beauty is what determines where that boundary condition is situated. And then everything within that boundary condition would be goodness. So if I drew a circle, the reason why the circle is this circle, this circumference, is because of beauty. But the border of that circle itself is the theme, and then everything within the circle is the content, which would be good, which would be like determined by its goodness.
So you said the beauty would be the
Beauty is what provides why the circle is the circle
okay.
size. So, like, let's say you uncover something that's even more beautiful. The circle, I'm just being crude, the circle gets bigger. But it's still the theme's always there. That the circle, the line that the circle, the boundary is still there.
Mm-hmm.
And then the content would be what's in the circle.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be determined by its goodness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then, so did you say the engineer focuses on the theme instead of beauty? Is that what you said?
You're right. And the artist focuses more on the beauty. Not that they don't focus on the theme, because they do.
Yeah.
But what is leading them is beauty.
Mm.
Where I mentally collapsed the theme into beauty. But Daniel was explaining that even in the book, I didn't do that, even though mentally I might have. That in the book that we wrote, I show how theme, in a certain sense, is the bridge between goodness and beauty, and how it, in a certain sense, has its foot in both camps.
Mm.
And that the difference between theme and beauty is such a subtle difference. And like Daniel was really explaining it, and I mean, I'll chip in here and there, but like he really parceled the difference, and it's such a subtle difference, but it's very important, and it's just you can never actually grasp. Like you can see something beautiful in an object insofar as it pushes the horizon of how you understand that object in a certain sense, or the sensation of that object.
Yeah.
Beauty is always like, it's like godly. There's something that's like hidden about beauty. Or theme is a command that brings that hiddenness out of the unconcealed, out of the concealed, and makes it unconcealed.
Okay. Theme would be the command. Okay.
Right. Theme is the command that brings the beauty out of being concealed into it being unconcealed. And then that's when you make a judgment, a determination on it based on its goodness. And in that sense, you're not even dealing with beauty anymore. Beauty has completely like raveled back into its hidden nature at that point.
So recently I've received some pushback because I shared with, I don't know if you know the IDW, whatever.
What's that?
It's like a mailing list. I don't even know how I got on, but basically I got on because like Cadell talked about me about, with Alexander Bard, or not Alexander, but just Bard. And anyways, I kind of shared I shared what we came up with, right? With that last talk, you, Jochen, and I. And the pushback I received was, they're very critical about Plato's kind of like it sounds too Plato for them, the good, the beauty. So one of them was just like, because I was trying to explain like the way we're talking about beauty is more like an event versus like a platonic form. You know, like it's a little bit different. And so the response I got back, specifically from Bard, was he was saying we shouldn't even talk about beauty. We should just say aesthetics.
Daniel made a really great distinction.
Yeah,
When he,
yeah.
I bet Daniel was
Here,
thinking about this. Did Daniel have access to this conversation?
is Daniel?
Not to
Yeah,
this
he's
one,
on
but
that
to
list.
the.
He's on that list. But I don't think he's read. I don't think he's read it though. Maybe he
Okay,
might have.
that's so funny that he brought up aesthetics because Daniel made a distinction between aesthetics and beauty.
Okay, what's that?
Aesthetics takes place in the experience where beauty doesn't.
Aesthetics takes place in the
It's
experience.
It's experiential. So there's a meta aesthetic, which would be theme. So it's the meta aesthetic in which how you experience beauty in the experience falls under, and how you experience beauty is what aesthetics is.
Got it. So I don't actually saying I don't actually experience beauty, but I more likely experience the aesthetics of beauty. Basically,
You the way I understand it, which I right now agree with, is you experience the theme,
okay,
which is the meta aesthetic.
okay,
So you experience all these desires and pleasures and whatnot in the aesthetic realm, which is all taking place under the command, the theme, all taking place in the unfolding that unfolds out of the theme. But where the theme comes from, where does the theme come from?
yeah.
Because like I've had this running question where it's like, is I wait, I feel like I wrote it down somewhere. It's but basically, theme comes from beauty.
Okay,
The meta aesthetic comes from the beatific vision.
okay.
Um, let me see here. Wait a second. Trying to find. Here we go. Jeez. Um, oh my god. I fucking suck. Where the fuck did I write this? Basically, I'm like I ask a question, which is theme what we humans call God, or is theme
Hmm.
God itself, or something like that?
Hmm. Well,
But so basically, yeah. So what were you gonna say?
well, I mean, it's
I want to hear Bard's pushback too, obviously.
um, yeah. I mean, I could probably see try to pull up the email. It was spicy because let's see, because I wrote this and my pushback was kind of funny.
Mm-hmm.
But let me pull it up and see. Hmm. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. This is what he said.
Uh-huh.
He said excellent, but then say aesthetics because this is my okay. So my response was actually this. I was telling him I agree. I said probably not explaining myself well. I said I would say pragmatism has not gone through an impressionist phase on like the history of art. So actually, maybe I do need to read his other comment. So basically, that message that I shared with you before about like this is what I wrote out that previous day after our talk with Jockin.
Mm-hmm.
Bard responds and he says, the problem, though, is that art, much due to Nietzsche, dropped both goodness and beauty after the Impressionists arrived and was not looked bad since, and was not looked bad since. Today, an aesthetics is either interesting or not, but there is no goodness nor any beauty in it because that would just be banal. This is the line references from Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil to Paglia's Sexual Persona Bible. And then he says, da, da, da.
Well, I mean, just my professor in college,
Uh-huh.
philosophy. He was philosophy and linguist, and he studied ancient Greek philosophy. But he took a linguistic approach,
Yeah.
which is a very different approach. And when you take a linguistic approach, it's inevitable for you to deal with goodness, because from a linguistic standpoint, all good is a gradable adjective.
It's a what?
It's a great, like you were describing, it's just a gradable property.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You have to when you say a proposition, like from a linguistic perspective,
Yeah.
you have to grade the predication of that proposition. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to have in the proposition how the subject and the predicate relate to each other. So like the copula, a byproduct of the copula that is the connector between the subject and the predicate is the very fact that the subject is able to grade the predicate.
Mm. Yeah.
Tall, short, like.
Yeah. It's like a description.
It's impossible to get around. Like it's by like it's an inherent feature of at least like the English language.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my pushback was, I basically was saying like, because he was arguing, the history of art already done this. I was like, well, I don't think pragmatism has gone through an impressionist phase.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then I said like, I would say beauty is as an event, which is more what I'm arguing for. And then this is what he said. He goes, excellent, but then say aesthetics when you mean aesthetics, as aesthetics goes beyond any assumed eternal Platonist forms. So in his understanding, it's beyond the forms. And then he adds this. He goes, aesthetics
What
is
is beauty and good?
Yeah. And then, but in his definition, I'll read the rest here. He goes, aesthetics is per definition always in flux, just like ethics, from where aesthetics comes from. He goes, plays with aesthetics and ethics together. Fundamentally and eternally evolving, it all depends on, or what Soderquist and I call proto-Panism, which is identical to Zoroastrian, some weird word, as pre-Platonist ideal, still the ideal in Chinese and Japanese literature. Ebert nails this perfectly with automaticity versus problematicity. Attention is firmly on the side of problematicity. Art is the creation and maintenance of problems. Science tries to solve problems and makes problems obsolete. Hence, art has to invent new problems with new riddles to solve. Hence, philosophy is art and not science.
I mean,
it's an interesting way to look at it, because then aesthetics would be that.
I'm getting a work call.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Let me take. Oh, it just hung up.
Maybe they didn't mean to call you.
Let me call him back. Sorry, hold on. Sorry about that.
You're good.
Sorry, what were you saying?
I was just saying, it's like an interesting way that he looks at aesthetics as a kind of just like always in flux kind of thing. Um, yeah,
I
and then
mean,
he's
I agree with that.
yeah. Me too. I mean, I didn't have any quandaries or didn't have any uh, against it. But I was also
It's
thinking,
just
go ahead.
sorry. My problem would be okay. Describe the flux.
Describe the what? The flux?
If I, yeah, if like
Yeah.
because the way he's talking and saying you can't talk, you shouldn't talk about this or that, like especially goodness. If you're saying don't talk about goodness, then describe the flux. Like I would like to hear like an English sentence that doesn't have to do with goodness in order to describe the flux, because that would be my problem. Because like pragmatically speaking, like I mean that is the only way. Like you have to you have to describe something. You have to say something.
Yeah.
So at that moment of you saying something, goodness is there, right then and there. That's how I see it at least.
Yeah. I mean, I've been thinking about this one problem that I can't quite get over, and I don't know if it's like just an unnecessary problem that I'm dealing with or not. But like the problem that I'm dealing with is ironically the concept of the beautiful as I started thinking about it more.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly because I think it's precisely that collapse into beauty being good that it's really hard to
Mm-hmm.
talk. It's really hard to talk about the beautiful, and it made me even get to the point of being like, should we even call it beautiful if that is the almost innate reaction to collapse the beauty into good? Like, because I can imagine that, like, if I'm talking to people about beauty, they
Mm-hmm.
would they would have a kind of understanding, but then also be like, it's weird the way you're using beauty, right? Like for them, it would be weird the way we would be conducting ourselves as talking about beauty as such. And I think that's like the gap for me
Yeah.
is like, is there a way to talk about beauty without talking about beauty? Because I do believe
Yeah.
we're playing on certain connotations that would be hard to break, but then also at the same time, like, like almost like the Nietzschean sense would be like, play with the word anyways, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But it's funny because Nietzsche also takes this almost same approach as your professor did with good and evil. He said, it originally didn't have like a moralistic connotation. It was a description to like that which was evil was like lowly slave. You know, it was a description of basically a poor person. And the aristocrats were that which was good was basically a description of the people that had power, strength, and courage and all that. Like it was just like that. It was originally kind of in some sense a class description,
Hmm.
like almost Nietzsche's take on this. But then it developed into like basically a description of morality. Good, there's evil, so on and so on. Um, but yeah, I mean, the beatific vision. I mean, I'm all for it. I would say, but I think it's hard for people to think of beauty as also tragic, and I think that's the part that I struggle with explaining because I think for people, beauty is always good, and in some sense, that's true. But to take the more tragic side of beauty, that which annihilates you or can annihilate you, um, it's really hard to talk about that kind of beauty.
Or another way of saying it is it extends, changes the boundary conditions.
Yes.
So in that sense, it's actually it feels more aligned to me as beautiful, or it's not that sad. Oh, the boundary conditions have just changed. That to me is like necessary in order for there to be vitality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I do agree with the boundary conditions. Um,
Like
but go ahead. Yeah.
sorry. Beauty beauty is always outside of the predication, and humans can barely even predicate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, all like human beings, their main goal, their designation is just to elucidate.
Yeah.
So then in that sense, how do you go about elucidation without goodness?
Yeah.
Oh my god, my work's calling me again. I'm so sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. You're good.
Fucking closets, man.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, boundary conditions. I'm going to give an example about how perhaps frustrating this would be for a person. Um, you discover you discover you have cancer. That means the boundary conditions have changed.
Yeah,
Okay.
I like where this is going immediately. Okay.
Right. You discover you have cancer and the boundary conditions have changed.
Uh-huh.
Someone might say, where's the beauty in that? Right.
I got you.
Go ahead.
So the problem immediately is
Yeah.
that someone has gotten cancer. Who is this someone to you? This is where I feel like
Uh-huh.
this is where the details matter, and I feel like what treating who this subject is as the thou.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, I can add context actually, because
Yeah.
so
So
my
that's what I was gonna ask.
yeah,
Context.
so my partner, she's had cancer twice.
Holy shit. Oh my
Um,
god.
yeah, and she's afraid of having it again. And she said this really like poetic note to me last night, where she was like, "I feel like I can never have a past because the threat of the cancer is always like in the futural. Like she could always get it again, basically." Um, so in some sense, she's saying that she lives with no past almost because the cancer can't be a past. Um, but anyways, there was a moment, and this was like a couple days ago. I was telling her about Nietzsche and this sort of life affirmation philosophy. She got really upset with me, not like actually at me, but just like she was just like, all this stuff really sounds like a theory to me in the face of actual suffering, because
Mm-hmm.
one of her coworkers' daughter uh, basically has cancer, right? And she was upset because she can't do anything. She doesn't know what to do. Like, there's nothing that can be done, really. Like, she just feels.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so in some sense, she got really upset about that kind of philosophy, that kind of Nietzschean philosophy of just like, yeah, even affirm the suffering, affirm, whatever happens. Um, but it was funny because I realized that there was a kind of double move in Nietzsche's philosophy. That double move is actually when you can't affirm that too,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Right, like the fact that that's like and it's funny because I learned that from Buddhism too, where it's like you're actively trying to let go, but then you realize you can't let go, and so you let go of that too. Um, so Nietzsche's affirmation I thought was really interesting because it's a kind of double move affirmation where it's like, yeah, affirm life, affirm suffering. But then there's this other option of like, well, someone would be like, well, what if I can't? And
Mm.
it's like, and if you can't, you're resisting. But if you
If
affirm
you
that you know that you can't, you actually cease the resistance,
mm-hmm.
right? Which I thought was fascinating. Um, so it's weird because the boundary condition for something like this, it might, I think that's why that's why it's hard for me to be like, it's hard to argue. I don't think it's hard to argue in the case of like our group that beauty can also be tragic.
Mm-hmm.
There's something about beauty that is also tragic and kind of annihilating.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I think just trying to even describe that and be like, yeah, that's beautiful would be like such an insult to the boundary conditions. You know what I mean? But it's almost like
Well,
beauty is to affirm that boundary condition, right? Without actually talking about it, as to say, oh, it's beautiful.
I think that it's an insult when you're understanding how it's an insult only when the beauty collapses into the good, as Jacqueline would say.
Yeah. Hmm.
So like this is where like the theological question is just unavoidable.
Hmm.
Um, I rem oh my God, I remember the quote. It's did God create theme?
Or did theme create
Oh my
God?
God. Wait. Wait, yeah. Did God create theme or is theme what we humans call God? And basically, when you think that God created theme, that is when you see a difference between the beauty and the good.
Hmm. it would have to be a certain conception of God for me to find that viable. Mainly because now we're throwing ourselves into like a realm of like religious understanding, and like,
Mm-hmm.
for example, for like the Buddhists, right? There is no God, right?
Uh,
So how would that
the infinite,
make
the,
manifest
the the infinite.
the infinite?
That's
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. I think I would say the opposite, right? I would say it's the infinite, or you could say the unknown God, the unknown known, or the unknown, which creates the theme. And then it's the theme that which creates our stories of God, Buddha, etc.,
mm-hmm.
etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
Like more mythological kind of stories. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
because if it's unknown God, a God that can only know Himself, then for me, I could accept that. Um, but it just like, to me, it follows a risk of just like, basically it follows a risk of, because some people can be like, well, what's your conception of God? And I feel like the moment you follow into that line, the moment you follow into that line of thought, it's basically the theme creating your notion of God. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
you could say it's the encounter of theme that gives us a certain connotation of God or no God.
Hold on, I'm just moving positions. My roommate just walked in. Can you say that last part again?
I said, or we can say theme is that which is the encounter that gives us a certain conception of God or no God.
Yeah, I would say that. I would absolutely say that because the no God is your God. You know.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Because there's and like it's really clear to me. Like I urge you to definitely watch that last hour and a half of the net because Daniel goes Daniel goes in.
Okay.
But basically, it's really clear to me from like a linguistic standpoint that there is something that there is something that there, there is something outside of the sentence.
Yeah.
You know, you have a subject within the sentence,
Uh-huh.
and within the sentence, that subject has a predication. Otherwise, it wouldn't even be a
Subject.
subject.
Yeah.
But then you have something uttering the sentence, which is like another subject outside of that sentence.
Yep. Mm.
So if we were to make an analogy,
Yeah.
we're in the sentence.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, this is like very similar to like Lacan's split subject,
Yeah.
right? That the one that which utters, or the one that is enunciated, and then the one that's like embodied.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's like the two. You could say maybe the sentence is that which is enunciated, and then the one that is doing the enunciation is the embodied
Right. So
subject.
like from the positionality of the enunciator,
Yeah.
it makes no sense to talk about interest or entertaining or attention because it immediately becomes ironically the opposite.
Could you give an example of that?
What would be a good conversation?
Is that the
Let's
question?
construct let's construct a conversation.
Okay.
How would we go about that? to me, if we were to say, let's make an interesting comment.
Uh-huh. It kind of, yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, your headphones, I can't hear you. You're like muted. Yeah, but you're still muted. I know. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Do you like Bluetooth connect somehow? That's so weird. Can't unmute. Yeah. That's so crazy. I hate to restart. The button is red. Yes. And it won't turn off. Wait, what button? You talking about the record button? Because that's the only button that's red. Or are you talking about the end call button? You said you can't hear me? Let's see. You can hear me? No? Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. Okay, what red button? You talking about the end call? Yeah, maybe try joining on your phone. I'll just give you, hold on. Let's see. How do I share this? Okay.
Okay. I don't know what that was. Yeah, if we were to go about how do we construct a conversation,
Yeah.
and we came at it from what would be an interesting conversation,
Yeah.
that doesn't really seem like it's delimiting what a conversation could be.
Yeah, I mean it's that ironic situation of just like, let's plan a fun day.
Yeah,
Everyone's gonna have fun. And
yeah,
then it kind of ironically turns not fun because everybody's got to attend this fun day.
right, exactly,
Okay.
exactly. So like that's my problem with where he's saying, "Oh, aesthetics is interesting." Well, it's like, okay, well, I'm pretty sure he's an artist. So like it's funny to me if you were to communicate to another person, interesting doesn't mean much. that's 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 where it's like goodness. That you can make a delimitation pretty easily with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Much easier.
Delineation. That means beauty has to be in excess.
Yes. Always experienced in a particular, but the origin of it is always in excess because it's outside of the sentence, but yet it can only be experienced in the sentence.
But it's not an idealism, right?
No, that's what's crazy about it.
Yeah, it's not. And I think this is like where, because like even Nietzsche kind of, I have it pulled up here. This is what he says about good. This is what's interesting about his notion of good. He
Mm-hmm.
says good. He's like, I have many stylistic possibilities. The most multifarious art of style that has ever been at the disposal of one man. Good is any style that really communicates an inward state, that makes no mistake about the signs, the tempo of the signs, the gestures. All the laws about the long periods are concerned with the art of gestures. Here's my instinct. Here my instinct is infallible. Good style in itself, pure folly, mere idealism, on the level with the beauty in itself, the good in itself, the thing in itself. So yeah, this idea of good is any style that really communicates an inward state, that makes no mistakes about the signs. Good is any style.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But it's not just any style. Like it's any style if that style is valued significantly within the context of what that style is, like what the style is in or for. I mean, yeah, the context of for, sorry.
Yeah.
And before. And that's where my professor's work is. But like you can only get there through linguistics.
Mm-hmm.
That's like the weird thing. It's like it was more of a linguistic class than a philosophy class, honestly.
So okay, so let's go back to this idea of the storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
So you make two distinctions. There's storyteller,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's storyteller, which is the hyphenated one.
Mm-hmm. Which basically is recognizing that there is this predication happening outside of the sentence.
The one with the hyphen, correct?
Mm-hmm. Because I'm telling the story. The story is always outside of me telling it.
Yes.
It's just one way in which I tell it.
Okay. Yeah.
You know?
The storyteller doesn't subtract anything.
No.
Yeah.
That's the so like the enduring feature of a storyteller is theme.
Mm-hmm.
And in that sense, because it's always toward some story, actually quite beautiful and not this tragedy that I have to overcome, but rather it's like you can see there's a tragedy that I have to like actually lean into more.
Yeah. Yeah. And then
And the more you lean into it, it becomes an epic. Sorry.
Yeah. So your questions about realizing themes. So let me because I think you have like a levels of gradation, right? Levels of where it's like philosopher, then storyteller,
Mm-hmm.
and then storyteller with the hyphen. So the philosopher is basically one that you could probably say doesn't understand that he's having just an approach to being, right? Like he's pursuing what he believes to be truth, but in reality, truth is actually just what accommodates that approach to being, which makes him believe said truth.
Mm-hmm.
Then storyteller without the hyphen is that which understands that he is always giving an approach to being.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But then now this understanding that you're always giving an approach to being, you could say like this is the kind of relativistic mode, perspective mode. But then that one step higher is realizing that is I think you were saying that which utilizes the theme.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how will we and you're do you still equate theme with logos? Like per your per your count with Jockin?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so I guess you're trying to argue that storyteller with a hyphen is that which utilizes the theme in the sense of that, understands that the theme is always impartial.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means the storyteller affirms the other storytellers
By virtue,
by virtue of the
if you
theme.
have genuine access, like access point to it,
Yeah.
it's by virtue that is the case. A good example is when you write a story and you get a good note. Because for them to give you a note, that means they have to see the theme. And they're seeing it differently from a different access point than you.
Uh-huh.
And because by virtue of that different access point, they're able to give the note.
Okay.
But yet it's still part of the same, like that note, it's not like a note that's like for a different story. The
Uh-huh.
same vision, it's the same story.
Yeah, I'm still struggling with the difference between the two notions of storyteller that you're playing with.
So
Even though like I know the description of the other storyteller is like that which utilizes theme, I'm just trying to understand the more radical difference between the two of like, I guess because there seems to be a more subtle awareness in the higher one versus the storyteller that knows his approach is just an approach to being.
like the storyteller without the hyphen is one who will stronghold the story. Like if you remember Jock and I talking about that.
Stronghold the story.
Yeah, they grip the story. It must be like this and only like this.
Okay. Yeah, but
Not,
see, that's the part that gets me confused because philosopher then for me is that position.
then I guess they're really I guess there really isn't that big of a difference, if at all, between the storyteller and the philosopher.
Okay. Okay. Because I guess what I'm yeah, I mean that would make sense because it's like because I feel like it's when you're doing philosophy, you're being a storyteller. But it's
Yeah.
when you're aware that you're being a
So,
storyteller that you're in the storyteller that's a hyphen.
yeah.
Right? Like I feel like that to me that makes sense. But like this notion between philosopher and storyteller is just kind of like to me it's the same thing because they're both trying to say that the story is the only story.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is kind of like the dogmatic form of just like this isn't an approach to being, this is the way to being.
Mm-hmm.
Versus the storyteller would say this is, and I like Heidegger's quote here, like you showed me earlier, which is Heidegger would say it's a way to being.
Yeah.
Not the way, but a way to being.
Right.
Um, but now we get into a more interesting realm because how do we, for example, like I think a lot of people understand the idea of perspectives and relativity,
Yeah.
but I think what it's kind of transgressed to is actually another form of a philosopher, basically. Like it's a way, like this kind of relativity is a way to actually affirm one's dogmatic story without having to deal with the tragic consequences of the fact that there's other stories. Like it's like a weird position because it's like people are aware of relative perspectives, but they also use that as a crutch to maintain their story.
Yeah, it's like an excuse to
Yeah.
maintain it.
It's like, yeah, that's your truth. This is my truth. It's like a way to protect yourself.
Yeah.
And so in that
Yeah.
sense, not
By
really.
virtue of no truth.
Yeah, exactly. So um, you're not really like grappling with anything tragic, really. You're like still self-preserving yourself. And in that sense, I think that's when you fall into a kind of like idealism.
Hmm.
right? And it gives you the excuse to remain in your idealism because everything is perspective and relative.
Yeah.
So I feel like the storyteller with the hyphen is one that is able to understand that the tragic part is um, I have an idealism, but so does everybody else, or something like that. Or like
It's
I affirm that which is everything
mhm.
that is even opposed against me, without making it a kind of crutch for my own view.
It's a different motivation. It's a different
Yes.
mentality.
Yeah.
It's the mentality is I'm trying to push my boundary condition
Yes.
as a storyteller. Like because you recognize it's a way, deep down your ego wants to find the way.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. Yeah.
And you're aware of that.
Uh-huh.
And you're aware that the only way to find the way is by keep pushing the boundary conditions of your current way.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, this is interesting because now it's like, how do we push from the idea of the temptation of my way to a way? Like basically, how do we oversaturate that part to get into the next paradigm of like it's a way, without being like a sort of crutch maneuver? And like I think this is where like Nietzsche kind of helps too, because it's like to find the way is solely reactionary. Like basically, you are trying to find off, and you're trying to fight off and defend the the very forces that give vitality to your notion of the way.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's like what's ironic about it is the very things that you deny are the very things that actually allowed you to have that
Right.
idea in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Because with an idealism, you have to deny something, right? But it's that very denial that it's the existence of that denial that allowed you to have that conception of idealism anyways. So the storyteller with the hyphen would be I affirm both the idealism and that which allows your idealism to come into being.
Yeah.
Um, and so that means it's like it's a way of relating. It in funny ways, it's actually a way to answer the pluralistic problem,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like how do we deal with cultural pluralism and so on? And the way we generally mitigate that now is kind of like tolerance, but I don't even think what we're talking about is necessarily tolerance. Like because
It's
tolerance
the
is
opposite.
the opposite, right? Right.
It's like a strong embrace. So you can, these are like strong words that seem negative, but they're not to me.
Yeah.
It's like a strong embrace so you can destroy yourself.
Yeah. 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 It's the pluralistic paradigm is the chance for joy in the annihilation of becoming.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if we're just tolerating, tolerating is a way to keep the distance of the enjoyment of annihilation.
Right.
Right.
So,
You're keeping a distance of the other, and you're like, yeah, I affirm the other, but like, no, you don't, because to affirm the other would be to, in some sense, annihilate yourself.
yeah. So let's take that and apply it to a situation where we all have to deal with cancer, death.
Yeah. Okay.
Because so if you're a storyteller, you're welcoming it because your whatever idealistic notions you do have about it are about to be faced with the truth.
Mm-hmm.
So in a certain sense, it should be exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I
And
like.
then you're like, oh, so I should just kill myself. No, because in that sense, you're letting your ideal
Uh-huh.
control something
Mhm.
that is actually part of the beauty, part of the other, part of outside of the sentence. It's a
Uh-huh.
conflation between you acting within the unfolding, within the sentence, within the story, and you being your own arbiter of your own story.
Hmm.
And in that sense, this is where it's like internal damnation vibes, but it's like I'm guessing. I mean, who knows? But I'm guessing it's just it changes your positionality of the unfolding
Mhm.
as it relates to outside of the sentence.
Yeah.
It obfuscates it in a way
Uh-huh.
where you might not actually encounter something that could destroy you. You're not allowing yourself to get to the point where you naturally encounter that which destroys you.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Or or another way would be to look at it is you killing yourself, you getting to the point of that is your own cancer. That is your own death wish, death dealer, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So it could be argued that it is part of, if you actually want to do that,
Mhm.
that is part of your unfolding.
Yeah.
And then your ideals are met there. I hope that made sense. I think it's tricky.
Yeah, I mean it's like, well, suicide's interesting in the sense of like there's a certain valuation about life that like leads to suicide.
Hmm.
You know? And you could say like actually when that valuation of life is lacking, people commit suicide. Um,
Hmm.
but what's ironic about it is that it's still predicated on that same valuation about life.
Hmm.
And so in this sense, like it's really your own story that killed you. This is actually
Hmm.
this is actually kind of like what Albert Camus kind of said, like it's philosophical suicide. Philosophical suicide is thinking that um, there's only this story, there's only this way, and when there's only
Right.
this way, you've already committed suicide, like
I got to
mentally.
take him on a walk. So I'm bringing you outside.
Okay, yeah, so you've already committed suicide, like mentally, and then
Hmm.
now basically once you've committed suicide mentally, I mean, it's, and in some sense, it's only a matter of time before you commit suicide by virtue of your notion of the way.
Hmm.
um, but yeah, I mean, because to be a storyteller and confront things like suicide and death would be actually to take the annihilation not as an end, but as a activity of a way of participating in being. So like the enjoyment without suffering while encountering tragedy is very interesting to me because basically it's like it's this acceptance maybe or letting. I like the word letting maybe in this case. It's this letting of just like if you make death not in the periphery but in the actual focus, then it actually sheds light on the fact that you can practice a way of dying as a kind of affirmation of living.
Right.
Whereas we kind of do the opposite, where death is always in the periphery, and thereby actually we're sort of just like we are always reactionary to death being on the periphery, meaning we sort of living in a sort of like death is not at the forefront of our thinking, so there must be a way, but actually that way is precisely because death is on the periphery. Whereas if you had death in the foreground, as the main focus, then you would actually see that your story is just a story.
Right. And
Like,
when you,
I think that,
mhm.
man,
Sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I just want to say, like, when you say just a story, like, I just want to make it clear that that's not like diminishing or belittling your reality.
No. Yeah,
I
no.
know you're not thinking that, but
Yeah, yeah.
you're
It
sending
would
this to
sound like
whoever's
that.
listening.
It would sound like
Like,
that. Yeah,
it would sound like that,
it
but
would.
the reality is we've actually uh, made it. We position ourselves in like an ill position,
Mhm.
and that's why it feels like it would be a belittling.
Yes. No, yeah, that's exactly right. Like, that's why having, so if you have death as the periphery, then to say my life is just a story is basically being in an ill position, basically.
Right.
Um,
Right.
because it means that if death is on the periphery, that means that suicide and everything else is also on the periphery when that story ends.
Right. No, I agree. I just wanted to show you this. He's offering it up per usual. Oh, you peed all over yourself. Great. Thank you. It is a puppy. Yes. Come on, Hyde. Come on, babies. Yes, he is. Have a good day. Sorry about that. Can you say just that last part again? Because I
Yeah,
had a
well,
thought. And then...
yeah. What I was saying was that when we have death on the periphery, then saying my life is just a story is belittling yourself. It's a way to belittle, and it's a way to be in an ill position. But if you take the same sentence but placing death as the foreground, as the main point of focus, then to say my life is just a story is to acknowledge that there is such an abundance about life because of this.
Right.
But the abundance of life can only be perhaps really shaped by having death as the focus.
Yeah.
Because if not, you don't understand that actually what you're doing is, in some sense, killing yourself without without knowing that you're killing yourself. So it's weird because it's like I want to even change like this notion of suicide where it's like why do we wait for death to be on the periphery for us to think about like our perspectives and reality about life when the practice of dying would literally be like you can never like actually die until your death actually happens, but the fact that you can practice dying
Right.
towards death as a way of affirming life,
Yeah.
right? Like that, but that's like the hard move to make people go from, because suicide is also predicated on the same logic of people saying that there is a way, but it's precisely by saying that there's this way and only one way that suicide is already like as a possible consequential end by virtue of that maneuver.
I come.
Huh?
Sorry, I was telling my dog to come.
Oh,
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, you're good.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying, you can live a death just by. I guess a question is like, is story constituted by the body, mind, and like soul?
Uh-huh.
And if that's the case, is story, like, let's say your body could live for as many years as it can, as many years as you want.
Yeah.
I feel like in classic vampire things, each vampire, like, to blend in with the environment, they go through different personas and different stories, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, oh yeah, when I ruled the castle back in 1332,
Yeah.
like that was that story, and now I'm in, like, I don't know if you've seen What We Do in the Shadows, but
Yeah, dude, I
I mean,
love that movie.
have you seen the TV show?
No, I haven't. My partner likes it too, but I've actually saw the film before I knew it was a TV show, and it's hilarious. I love it.
Yeah, yeah. So, like, I wonder, basically, this whole like notion of our bodies living longer,
Yeah.
is that going to just bring out the fact that we are living stories, or is it going to diminish what a story is even more? Or are we diminishing ourselves in a certain sense even more? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, it's like this is one of the hardest problems talking about death because I feel like, in the 1800s or something or and later, we could have argued like death is the one thing that we can't escape. But people now are growing more confident in the idea that we can possibly even elude death through the future, right? Technology and everything, right? Whether it be transferring consciousness. I mean, there's a bunch of presuppositions and all that, but just the fact that people have the idea that death can be overcome already makes the idea that death is the one thing that is certain about life almost questionable. But
Mm-hmm.
here's the thing, and I like your vampire metaphor or analogy, is that it puts death in the perspective of like, why do we have to talk about death only from a physical body point of view, um, versus like the logic of death is that fundamentally there is an end, and that end is the revealing of a story. And so in that sense, to be the affirmation of life is to be almost kind of like living dead, um,
Right.
because actually what is happening is you were already functioning according to that idea, except you weren't taking death as seriously, in the sense of you weren't thinking about it. And it's funny, we never really think about it at the forefront, but when you do, you realize like in some sense everything is a story, and that's okay, because and that makes life like ironically a beautiful tragic kind of thing. um and so yeah, I mean, I think Emil Sharon kind of made the good point of like we often think death is separate from life. There's life and then there's death, but actually like death is very imminent in life at the beginning. um
Mm-hmm.
so I think even talking like a negative pragmatism would almost be a way of practicing death.
Yeah,
Right.
definitely,
It's a
definitely.
yeah, it's a way of practicing, and it can be joyful too, like the enjoyment of annihilation, like learning to enjoy that kind of process,
Uh-huh.
um is, yeah, I think that would constitute what it would mean to be like a good storyteller, maybe. um
Yeah, and I think it's evident too when, like, let's make a conversation. Like, instead of let's participate in a conversation, just simply saying, like, okay, let's make an experience,
yeah.
shifts the position of death greatly, because in that sense it just seems like it's like part of the feature of making the experience. In that sense, it's like the climax going into the resolution of every experience is always beautiful then.
Yes. Yes.
But like if you're participating in it, it sucks.
Yes, because participating is reactionary.
Right. And it's also like, wait, this is a cool experience. I don't want it to end. But like when you're the one like constructing the experience, the very idea, the very like story that you think about making this experience being
Yeah.
is already dead to you.
Yes.
It's part of it already. It's part of the initial
Mm-hmm.
like it's the part of the initial thought that sprung forth.
Yes, because creating constitutes a kind of implicit destroying in the process.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's a way of practicing death.
Right.
Because you wouldn't be practicing death if you were just solely participating.
Right.
Because you don't want you don't want it to end. Like you said, you don't want it to end. So you're in some sense trying to keep death at the periphery.
Yeah.
Versus keeping death actually as the very creative force that it can be
Mm-hmm.
in our development of becoming.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like it's such a simple move.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, theoretically, it's a simple move. I agree. It's a super simple move.
Practically, it's very difficult.
Yes.
Could you imagine going on the net and instead of participating in the net was actually a collaboration of creating experiences?
Yeah.
What would that even be like?
Yeah. I have no idea.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I was saying, like to allude. I said it like a few weeks ago. It's like I don't even know what a conversation would be like as a storyteller in this context. I don't even know how to approach. I don't even know where to begin.
Yeah. I mean, that really is like the hard part because it's almost like you have to go ahead.
Daniel was like, you're basically, I remember saying like we wouldn't be able to do storyteller stuff here, but this is actually the ironic situation where we're talking in such a way where we're creating the tension for the ironic situation to happen. That way we can walk away from the net and be storytellers.
Yeah.
That's what Daniel's response was.
Yeah, I mean, I was starting to think on that same note too, because I was like, well, if we can't do it at the net, then that means the net becomes a play space for that to, I guess, be a catalyst for us to become storytellers.
Right.
Because it's like when I go on the net, and I've been always becoming more and more confident in just saying dumb shit, because it's like it almost doesn't really matter. You know, like it doesn't matter because I have a sort of faith in the process, which means like I have a faith in my own death, basically. Like I have a faith in my own death in the sense of something will be discovered by this annihilation. Something beautiful will happen. Some new insight, some whatever. And then I repeat the process again in the next session where it's like we're playing off the same ideas or whatever, and then something happens where it gets challenged or there's pushback or whatever. But the whole process of that, just the process itself, that oscillation between the space of the net and then off the net is, you could probably say, like the storyteller paradigm of like you're going in this space where you are practicing dying, and then when you get off that space, you're living that practice, basically, or maybe that oscillation between the two. But yeah, I mean, like even this idea of like practicing bad philosophy is is brilliant because it's like, well, there's a way to like affirm the suffering of bad ideas or the suffering of like my horrible thinking or whatever, without it being so, I guess, like, you affirm that you're always going to have like poor conceived thoughts, or not well conceived thoughts or well thought out thoughts. So death, that's a way of embracing the practice of dying, I would say, versus if you're having death on the periphery, it's somebody that doesn't want to say something stupid, or
Right.
they're afraid of saying something wrong or being inaccurate or whatever, and that's predicated because you believe there's the way, there's
Right.
the way of speaking, the way of an actual truth, or whatever. But the actual truth of the matter is that truth allows you to have that,
Uh,
and kind of be stupid, be dumb, be ignorant. Like, it allows you to have that existence,
mm,
so
yeah.
I think that's so thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, just got back from the walk. Just washed my hands. Gotta sit back down. Um. So I'm constantly trying to figure out how to push the ironic situation into a different position
Uh-huh.
where we can be storytellers on the net.
Okay.
Because I think that would change how people treat the participation. They would treat it as like they don't want that. They don't actually want the participation. They want to be making the participation possible.
Okay.
And in that sense, I think people will find more meaning that way.
Yeah. And that's what's hard to create.
Yeah. I just
Yeah.
think like so much has happened in human history that we're at a point where any form of participation is scrutinized.
Yeah.
So we have to move beyond it.
We have to look beyond it. The way of creating the participation without being in the participation.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
really it's tough because it seems paradoxical.
Yeah. I mean, I think like the key feature is the letting, maybe, or like because the reactionary pathos is that which wants to participate, not create the participation. To create the participation is the letting,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that
Yeah.
that actually makes sense. To create the participation requires a sort of letting to happen.
The beatific vision,
Yeah.
the letting.
Yeah. And in order for that to emerge. So it's almost like, how do we speak on the net to not limit participation, but to delimit the participation by creating a sort of participatory process.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think in some ways we do that. I mean, it's hard because it's like, well, I mean, I think it's as close to it as possible because in some sense you could actually say Daniel created the delimiting of the participation by it being open to everyone, right? The topic can be anything and we can broach it, but there, we do I mean, I don't know. Actually, I don't know. I mean, there's sometimes like the topics become very official that day, on the net. Like today, we're gonna talk about friendship. It just kind of like goes that way. So I guess in that sense, like it's hard to create the delimiting of the participation, but it does give you a chance to delimit your own participation. Meaning, like
Yeah.
you can engage with a topic that you've never engaged with before.
Yeah.
Like I rarely talk economics, but it's always interesting when I hop on and Daniel's talking about economics. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like for me, economics is very uninteresting, but also very important. So like I feel like I have to pay attention to um, economics and what it
Mm-hmm.
requires. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I want to think more about what that means to create the participation. I mean, in some ways, that's what art does, isn't it?
That's exactly what art does.
That's what art does. But how can we interact with each other where we create participation? Because I feel like that mode follows on one person.
That what?
I feel like that mode generally follows on one person
Yeah. Yeah.
being the creator of the participation.
The one who's aware of it all.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess this goes back to like how much truth can a person handle, which
Mm-hmm.
sort of dictates the degree of limitation of participation. Or
Mm-hmm.
no, it determines the degree of delimitation of the participation.
I guess how I see it, an ideal state.
And I just say,
You're in my matrix, but I'm also in yours.
okay, okay,
And I just don't know it. Like I know how you're in mine,
okay,
but I acknowledge that I'm in yours, but it's a mystery.
okay,
And then conversation at that point would be, how is it the case that we're both in each other's matrices?
okay, okay.
So that would be a dialogue between storytellers.
Yes, yes, that would be. And I
Which
feel like,
is,
go ahead.
I'll just say, I'm like, I said this with like Jock, and where it's like there's a dimension of the concept of lying, of the lie. There's a part of that in that realm. There's a small dimension where a storyteller actually is there. Like they're actually like dwelling in that in a certain sense.
The lie.
Yeah, yeah. Like not like so for you to know, for you to have someone participating in it, they can't be in the moment aware that they're participating in it as they're participating in it. So
Mhm.
you have to create the conditions for you to forget that you're participating in it. So you
Mhm.
have to create the conditions to make that person lie to themselves.
Yes, yeah, and that's the whole forgetfulness part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like it would be very uncanny for a
Yeah.
storyteller to talk to a storyteller when they're because in a certain sense the veil has to be fully lifted, like vulnerability to the max,
Hmm.
harsh judge, like there would be like one's self-esteem typically wouldn't be able to handle it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trust would be a problem, becomes a real problem.
Yeah. This is the definitely the affirmation difficulty because it's like you have to affirm and not deduce anything. And to not deduce anything is to leave yourself vulnerable. Because if you deduce something, anything, you're in some sense maintaining a defense.
Mm-hmm.
But you're almost asking, how can we do a participating where we're not aware of the participating? Because being aware of the participating would initiate defense mechanisms, but you can actually, but also cultivate the conditions to allow a certain forgetfulness to take place, so that way you can experience a kind of real letting of
Mm-hmm.
um, a real delimitation of the participation. Basically, like, to be able to actually participate, you need a form of forgetting, which can leave you open and vulnerable. But if you're aware of that open and vulnerability, then it's like, I mean, most likely you're going to be tempted to fall back into a defensive position, so that's why it even makes storyteller between storyteller a little bit difficult, because dialogue would require both in some sense to forget that they are participating in
Right.
vulnerable position.
Right. It's really easy when you're making a story together.
Yes.
That's what's so funny about it. But when you shift focus to life itself, it becomes like very tricky. Because like when you're making a story with other people, it's very easy to say something stupid and wrong, and that's okay.
Yes.
And in fact, you're kind of going into it being like, I'm an idiot.
Yeah. 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 But if it's the other way around, where there's another storyteller and they're not working on that same story
Mm-hmm.
as you, then it's almost like anxiety inducing.
Yeah. Literally.
Yeah, literally, it's anxiety inducing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, that is hard. I mean, because I think the net has already cultivated that kind of participation process, and not the latter, but the former, meaning like the net is almost like a way for us to like write a story together. Like we're not afraid to say something dumb or stupid or whatever. Like, we know in some sense that we're in a safe space.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not. I mean, obviously Daniel doesn't sell it as a safe space, but like, it's a safe space in the sense of just like, I've done this multiple times. I can say dumb
Mm-hmm.
shit.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm confident I can say dumb shit if I want to.
Mm-hmm.
But if I were to go on another space, right, where I don't know any of these people,
Mm-hmm.
let's say like if I go to like Philosophy Portal, right,
Mm-hmm.
there's always a bunch of new people or people I don't know.
What when you say go to like what is that? Like, is there like a talk thing like the net for Philosophy Portal?
Philosophy Portal. I mean, Cadell has done. Yeah, he's done some similar things like the net. I mean, he has like this whole like process of just like there's like the courses that he offers, and then there's like these like theme talks where it's like a person will talk about a specific theme from their project. One
Mm-hmm.
example was like Michelle was on there because they were talking about belonging. And so
Mm-hmm.
everybody was kind of circling around the theme of belonging in a group and kind of just like talking about like their experiences about belonging and how that kind of triggered some stuff for them, you know? So it's in that sense, it's kind of like the net, but the only thing is generally the net doesn't predetermine the theme of the
Mm-hmm.
conversation. The theme kind of arises in the conversation, you know?
Right.
Like
It's
Daniel will be like, I want to talk about this because I read this in your work recently, so let's talk about this a little bit more. He doesn't really like, today we're talking about this at the net. Like, it's never designated or pre-designated. It's kind
right.
of discovered when you go there.
Right.
Versus Cadell's is like the theme is pre-designated before the talk even happens.
Uh-huh.
And so in that sense, like I would say it's a good introductory process to get more comfortable with delimiting your participation, like becoming more comfortable with possibly saying something stupid,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it provides a restriction of a topic to a topic, versus on the
Mm-hmm.
net, you just never know what you're going to talk about. So you have to be ready for almost anything,
Yeah.
right? And that creates a lot of vulnerability if you're not used to
Mm-hmm.
that process. But we're still not going into spaces where, I mean, where it's like storyteller versus another storyteller, I would say. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It's I think, yeah, I mean, I think something like the net is only, something that cultivates that kind of process, but to say like everybody becomes a storyteller in the net is like, I don't think so.
Right. I think you could see the issue where it feels like in reality, to be a storyteller, you have to have power and money. Because to create your matrix, the
Mhm.
material is costly. It's either
Yeah.
it's either money or power, or within a group dynamic
Mhm.
between like trust, loyalty, and intelligence.
That means that the storyteller is always kind of alienated,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah.
Yeah.
So like that's part of the crippling aspect of it, because when you reveal your story to the other storyteller, you're revealing your alienation
Mhm.
and everything that's sacrificed within that alienation,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
everything is at stake of not being sound.
Yeah. Alienation. Yeah, I mean that's like the ultimate maybe lack right there, or the ultimate awareness of said lack, the alienation
Mm,
of a storyteller to another storyteller. And I guess you could say like it would be storyteller dialoguing with another storyteller would be kind of like encountering each other's alienation,
mm-hmm,
right? Like that's what it would be. So it would be, the question would be, how do we cultivate a space to encounter each other's alienation?
right.
Because at first the first step is you need to realize that you're alienated.
Mm-hmm,
The philosopher doesn't realize that. I'll put it on the same paradigm. The philosopher storyteller doesn't realize that.
mm-hmm,
The storyteller with the hyphen realizes
mm-hmm,
that there's an alienation, right? Like it's a story, not the story.
right,
To realize it's a story is to realize the alienation.
right.
To only think that there is the story is to dismiss an alienation, to
Mm-hmm,
avoid an alienation. Um, so yeah, and so affirming life would be affirming the alienation and that which is the product of the alienation,
mm-hmm,
the stories and the alienation, right? Yeah, man,
yeah.
that's hard. I don't. I mean, I feel like now we're really broaching like Buber Levinas now.
Mm-hmm,
Like I think I finally see it in the sense of like how this goes into ethics now.
right.
Like it's almost like, because there's this like, basically Nietzsche was, I would say, arguably showed that morality was a story.
Mm-hmm,
And Beyond Good and Evil, he basically shows morality is a story. Um, but the reevaluation of values is to say that that's to understand that it's a story. It's exactly that,
Right.
is to understand it's a story. And then you go to Heidegger with his like letting and clearing, and that clearing is necessary in order for you to even understand that there is an other that is alienated.
Mm-hmm.
But it also reveals your own alienation
To that other, and
to
that
that
the
other.
clearing
Yes.
is just allowing you to scaffold, have what is that the other is providing show itself.
Yeah, yeah. Like it's the alienation that goes both ways. Like it's the alienation to see myself as other and that which is actually other to me.
Right.
And then now we have an ethics,
Right.
right? We have an ethics now, Levinas, Buber, where it's like the debate now is how do we meet the other as other and even the other within ourselves, so to speak.
Literally.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, the other in ourselves. Yeah.
Definitely.
Because I would say the other in ourselves is when you realize that the philosophizing that you're doing is your storytelling.
Yeah.
Right? Not the actual self as such, but the other in yourself, which is the one doing the storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's given me so much thought about Levinas and Buber. Of just like, because I know they do have fundamental differences, but I feel like I do want to pick up Levinas, because I've been wanting to explore the difference between Buber and Levinas. And like, I don't know if you've heard like Supanchit's critique of Levinas, but like, it's always kind of haunted me because she was very critical about Levinas giving this idea of like you have a responsibility to the other.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, because of just like because then the demand towards the other is kind of like it functions like a super ego,
Mm-hmm.
basically, right? Um, but
But
I
then you realize
yeah,
that you're responsible for everything, and it becomes like almost very like not very pragmatic. It's not really like feasible.
if you're
You're in
responsible,
like yeah. If you're responsible for the other.
yeah,
That's literally encompasses so much.
yeah,
Like thinking about it can give someone like a panic attack.
yeah. I mean, I feel like we'd have to change the connotation of responsibility to being to being like something that doesn't function like a superego. Because I feel like if it functions like a superego, then I feel like that's just like us, like that's still believing that a story is the story. You know what I mean? Like I feel like if there is
Mm-hmm.
to be any sense of responsibility, it has to be the idea of it has to be almost like a negative responsibility in the sense of your realization is that you're a storyteller, you're alienated,
Mm-hmm.
so is the other. And so that responsibility would solely it would be an ironic responsibility in the sense of you understanding that you're responsible for your own death because you die your own death,
Mm-hmm.
but by dying your own death you ironically reveal the other as such. And so in that sense it's um it's like an indirect responsibility to the other almost, like you're not, I don't know. I mean, Buber had a different approach because he didn't call it a responsibility. He just called it like you can preemptively come up with like anything. I think the only danger of responsibility is that it's the danger of collapsing a story into the story. But I don't know. I mean, Supanchik's critique gave me a lot to think about, but I feel like Levinas is interesting, and I'm pretty sure there's more than that, you know.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why they're in the problem is, I think, a conflation between the immediate and the transcendent.
Okay.
If you are responsible for the other in terms of its transcendence, then a superego emerges. But if you are responsible to the other in the immediate, then it's just ethics. It's just, for example, like if like the Nazi example, if I were alive in the 40s, I mean, and I'm in like an area that people would take Jews and whatever, there's an immediate call to action because there's, in a certain sense, an immediate story. This is happening.
Okay.
Because people aren't coming into their own deaths in mass forms, in mass amounts of that. You know, so there's a certain like relation to death that if that certain relation to death where they're not coming into their own death gets revealed, there's an immediacy. There's like an immediate responsibility.
Okay.
That's what I would argue.
Okay.
Just from reading Levinas, because there is no like immediate response to like some transcendent other. There is no way of saying, okay, this is what's happening. This is what's happening. Therefore, I must respond. I must be responsible.
Yeah. Response and responsibility is very like in the same line.
Yeah.
To respond is to be responsible.
Yeah.
Basically, right? To like you always have a response, basically.
Right.
And like, Buber made this point too, like, but it's the way we position ourselves for said response. And I think I think to actually be responsible, and I actually think this is Derrida's point in I have to read it again. It's something about death again, his book on death, where to be responsible actually is to be able to understand that whatever knowledge you're leaning on is precisely a form of irresponsibility. Because he's showing like paradoxically, like if you're to actually be responsible, you shouldn't be leaning on any type of knowledge for you to respond to something. But the anxiety inducing thing is you have to respond to something and you want to do it the right way. So you're leaning on a certain form of knowledge to give that said response. Right. And so in that sense, Derrida's like, it's a kind of like paradox or an impasse of like responsibility and irresponsibility where you realize that you have to lean on a form of knowledge to respond anyways. Like it's impossible not to, almost. But it's the fact that you're aware that you're leaning on a form of knowledge to give you a response that makes you responsible, I would say. Like being actually responsible is understanding that you are leaning on a form of knowledge to respond to something. Right? But I don't know. But like Buber would say the opposite would be to be actually responsible is to come in totally naked into the situation. Like you don't come in with anything. You don't prepare nothing. Right? Like you don't like nothing. You completely like you let all your defenses fall. So you don't lean on nothing for this encounter. I mean, I don't know. Like sometimes I listen to Supanchik's critique and I'm just like I start getting critical just as much as like Heidegger and Nietzsche did get critical about the notion of ego, I think there's definitely a deserving critique of that, like the idea of ego, the idea that there is an ego, the idea that there's a super ego.
Was there a critique in What Is Sex?
No, it's actually a separate critique, and I don't even know if I could find it again. I think it's on one of my bookmarks for Twitter, but she wrote
I read What Is Sex, which is an amazing book.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's in What Is Sex. I want to say, I think it might just be like a paper that she wrote.
Okay.
It could be from one of her books. It could be, but I just know, like, I remember like briefly going through it and just like reading of just like the responsibility to another is basically a super ego function. And so that's the danger of being like demanding giving a command to be responsible for the other. That was kind of like her critique. Like you just wouldn't be able to understand you would be falling at risk to a kind of pathologization of the super ego by always making you responsible for the other.
But what I think it's fair to pathologize a situation when that situation is showing you that the other is coming into their own death not by their own accord. Like
When
it.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Elaborate on that.
If you see someone who's about to get killed,
Yeah.
you're the only one there, you're watching it, you're in a
Yeah.
room, and this person's like, help me, and you don't do something,
Uh-huh.
that's bad. Like, I don't like, there is a story, there
Uh-huh.
is one way of looking at the situation.
Okay. So you basically you're saying like real responsibility is allowing the person to be able to die their own death.
Right.
So basically not stopping like the murderer from killing somebody would be being irresponsible precisely because you're not letting the actual person die
Come
their
into
own
their own
death.
death.
Come
Yeah.
into their own death. But
Some
then there's
other. Mhm.
but then there's this other contrary thing, which is suicide. Right?
Yeah.
Because we prevent suicide from happening,
Mm-hmm.
but to me it follows the same logic. People describe suicide as bad,
Uh-huh.
and this is the part where it gets dangerous
It's
because
context dependent though. It's so context dependent.
yeah, it
Because
is.
there's a difference between like a suicide where there's this person who's in agony, who's 85 years old,
Mhm.
who like they have terminal cancer. There is no coming back from that.
Yeah,
And they're just in pain. So let's just like drive to Oregon and see what's good with a doctor there. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Where euthanization is legal. Like
yeah.
that isn't the suicide that you like. That's not an evil in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's not in my mind either. But I think like suicide's interesting in the sense of like yes, you okay. Let me phrase it from the way people try to prevent suicide. Um, I would argue that suicide is actually like a mystery for a lot of sciences, mainly because all they can do is detail the symptomatic structure of a possible suicide.
Okay.
Like you can only give a systematic account or describe what a possible suicide looks like, meaning like the person is giving away their things, spending all their money. They're just not interacting with family members, not interacting with friends, like all those kind of forms of like isolation, giving away. You could say those are symptoms of someone possibly being suicidal, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what always gets people is like when it was like a surprise suicide, right? Like I didn't understand
Right.
why they killed themselves. I thought they were happy. He
Mhm.
had a loving family, you know, everything else like that. So like nothing adds up to the reason of why this suicide happens.
Mhm.
But the point that I'm trying to make is that even in the Greek and Roman times, suicide was not um, seen as bad. Suicide was actually a way of being noble,
Yeah.
of you know, not basically to not die of cowardice, basically.
Mhm.
Um,
Japanese would do that. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like suicide was a way of is actually a form of being noble before you would fall into kind of cowardice, like where you wouldn't be able to kill yourself.
Right. So that would be to me akin to the hospice.
Yes, 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 yes. But see, that's what's interesting though, that discrepancy between the hospice situation versus like a more mental hospice. Like I would say maybe even suicidal ideation is kind of like being in a mental hospice.
Mhm.
Um, the real question is, can we actually prevent suicide? And I think this is where the letting of one's death is very interesting. And I know for probably a lot of people it would be problematic because it's like, well, suicide's inherently bad. Well, here's what's interesting. If we die at the end anyways, the person is only expediting that. Okay. So what is the, you know, this
The
is like,
fallout.
yeah, what is the fallout between what seems like the advocate, like I'm not advocating for suicide. You know, I'm not advocating and pushing for people to do it, but I'm just trying to say like there is something about suicide that's interesting in the sense of it's allowing the letting, like I really think suicide is such an, like it's so indeterminate, like I don't even think we really can understand it because every time we talk about suicide we end up in an ironic situation,
Mhm.
which is the one that's about to commit suicide knows what the symptoms of suicide looks like, and so they can respond in such a way that you will never know that they're about to kill themselves. So
Right.
if we can't actually prevent that ironic situation from happening, then for me it's like what's the point of saying, what's the point of like actually trying to like prevent that from happening if it just leads into an ironic situation? It's more like, here's what I think is actually interesting. What's more like is letting the person be could actually be also the possibility of them not doing the suicide.
Yeah. Or or just to piggyback off that, it's a different paradigm when you say create a situation where they won't commit suicide. It's someone who wants to commit suicide.
Yeah.
Because that flips their paradigm on their head that they're operating under.
You said
Because
create a situation.
create a situation. So that means, in a certain sense, you're, as a storyteller, you're alienated from it.
Uh-huh.
So create a situation where someone won't want to commit suicide. Because then I think you'll be thinking about the fact that you're just living in a possibility in a
Yeah.
way that's more, it actually hits you harder because you can easily just say, I'm being a puppet to my own possibility. And I don't have to be a puppet to that possibility.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Maybe I'm,
No, I think you're sharing something good. So basically like it's not that, you could say like the fixation on suicide definitely leads to an ironic situation, but to create a situation where suicide is a not a forbidden possibility would ironically undo the 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 realization of the alienation. I mean,
Mhm.
no, would undo, basically would reveal the alienation in itself, because if you keep suicide as a possibility, that means that there's other stories.
Mhm.
So that means it's to create a situation where suicide is a possibility, but it's a possibility among many, where you could say this, the actual suicidal person is, there's only one story, only one possibility.
Mhm.
And that possibility just failed. So that means there's only one way out.
Yeah. Right.
Right. So
So
that means
it's so silly when you think of it
you
like
actually
that.
have to embrace suicide as a possibility.
Yeah.
Right. And that means that there's other possibilities.
Yeah.
And that's allowing somebody to be responsible for their own
Mhm.
death.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the risky, I would say that's the risky maneuver that would have to happen.
Yeah.
As it just being a possibility. But
Right.
again, if it's,
And you quickly see the possibility when you just say, "Create me a situation."
yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And it's
exactly.
just like a totally different mode. It's
Uh-huh.
just like it has the participation subsumed in it.
Yeah.
It has the philosophy subsumed in it immediately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's what people need, as like, not as a forbidden, but as like, yeah, it's one possibility. And that means that there's other stories.
Right.
Right. So then it kind of defers that whole process,
Mm-hmm.
ironically.
Yeah.
Um, whereas I think the other method is like, everyone tries to eliminate that possibility by saying, well, there's just one story. And
Right.
you should continue striving for this one story.
Right.
Right. And like,
Right.
to me, that's already like suicidal,
Right.
because it doesn't work.
That,
That story's not working.
this is where love comes in a funny way,
Yeah.
because it's like you're only seeing it as one story. That's why you're in love.
Yeah.
That's why it's like falling in love is committing your own, like you are killing yourself at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're definitely broaching a new story too.
But it's not just a new story, it's like a fixed story,
Mm-hmm.
and the meaning of that story is open.
Mm-hmm.
Where a lot of people will have that fixed story, and the meaning of that story is actually closed, and that actually creates like toxic relationships and like lack of communication and openness.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like a weird play where you now see a story that is fixed, but it's open.
Mm-hmm.
The meaning of it,
Yeah.
not the possibility of it, because the possibility needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
Like, imagine that it would just be an open relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. You're right. Are you still reading Levinas?
Yeah,
Are you
I'm still
finished?
reading Levinas. No, I didn't finish. It's a hard read.
It's a hard read.
A very hard read.
Okay.
It's like, in my opinion, it's harder than Heidegger.
I mean, I feel like me reading like more than halfway through Phenomenon of Spirit has been pretty hard.
Yeah,
But yeah, man, I'm suddenly like wanting to read Levinas. I'm like on the side now.
I'm down to like read them together
Okay.
if you
Okay.
wanted to do that.
Yeah, I'll have to see if I can
No
get like,
pressure.
I have to see if I can get like the you're reading the Infinite one, right?
Yeah,
Okay. Levinas. I don't know, man. I always like the Jewish thinkers too. It's funny. I'm such a sucker for them.
sucker for the Jew.
Yeah, for like Buber and everything, dude. Like what?
Yeah, Yeah.
I'm trying to see if I can get it on Kindle, maybe, without waiting for.
But I gotta head off by 3:30.
Okay. Yeah, let's see if we can read Totality and Infinity together.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm down. I'm
Yeah,
down.
I'm
It's
down
so fucking hard.
because I think it's actually the logical movement of our thought at this point.
Yeah,
Like
that's what drew me to him.
yeah, no, yeah. I mean, it's funny because this is what drew me to Buber, but it took me reading Nietzsche to understand why that draw was important.
Right. It's funny.
Yeah, like it just
Like
like
retroactive.
yeah, it's like weird because I'm finally understanding like why was this sort of ethics necessary in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
And I do think it has something to do with like Nietzsche's kind of notion of affirmation.
Mm-hmm.
But that affirmation is like, yeah, you're affirming suffering, you're affirming everything that is available in life.
Mm-hmm.
But to affirm everything in life results in a paradoxical action, meaning letting.
Mm-hmm.
You're letting. And that follows Heidegger's thought. And that starts following like Buber and Levi-Nasz's thought, even though they all disagree on each other with each other, probably about how that should manifest. But
Mm-hmm.
I feel like ironically now it's kind of like that's the logical progress of the thought. You know?
Right.
It just makes sense to me now.
Right. Like Lacan is understanding the other,
Mm,
which is what drew me to Lacan. And then for me, what drew me to Levinas is how to treat the other.
yeah, that's
Because
yeah.
you can understand the other and it doesn't help you one iota on how to treat the other person.
No, yeah, that's true. That's very true.
So I don't think I really took a deep dive in Lacan. Like I read uh, his lecture series that it's in book form, like where it's like over like a decade of his lectures,
Oh yeah, yeah. The seminars? Are you talking about that?
the seminars, yeah. And like everything, it's like, oh, okay, I understand how to be myself a little bit more. I understand how to see things in other people a little bit more. But it left me wondering, like, how how do I treat the other person?
Mm,
Because there's no mystery in Lacan in a way, where like Levinas like leans into the mystery, like like Lacan precisely says the unconscious is a language, which demystifies the unconscious.
hmm
Where like Levinas is saying like like there's a mystery in the other, which is infinite, and
mm,
that actually is precisely what allows you to transcend. So it's like how you treat the other is actually how you transcend yourself,
mm, yeah.
which is what like it flipped on my head because it flipped, like I never thought of it as like self improvement in a certain sense,
Yeah.
but it's like how you treat other people actually is how you self improve yourself. Is
Yeah.
basically what Levinas is saying,
hmm
from what I've gathered so far.
hmm hmm
Which is why, like, for him, ethics is the first philosophy.
Ethics is the first philosophy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for him at least.
Yeah, I mean, Nietzsche actually gives a really good psychological take on suffering because um he's like when you're angry or like whenever like you're experiencing like a negative emotion, he's like generally you want to blame the person that is like
Mm-hmm.
nearest in that situation. But
Mm-hmm.
he's like fundamentally what's really mysterious is suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't even and I feel like the moment you try to grapple the theme of suffering, it starts making the other more mysterious.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's what I'm saying. Like, I feel like it just like you have to connect the dots a little bit with Nietzsche, but like, I'm like, it's like blowing my mind. Like, I'm just like, I'm seeing how they got there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm just like, oh shit, I see now like how it gets there. But all right. I know you gotta go, and I gotta go too. So I'm gonna
It
pause
was a
this.
good talk though.
Yeah.
A lot for me to think about for sure.
All right.